What's up, everyone? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic, and I'm doing something a little different here. I've never actually done a response video, but I'm going to do one now. A YouTuber I follow named Marty Worm put up a video about 20 albums that he got into as a teenager that pretty much, helped shape him to become the metalhead he is now. And I really like this guy. Definitely check out this channel if you already haven't. I'm pretty sure if you've subbed this channel, there's a good chance you found that guy's channel, and it's awesome. He always has tons of great content. So I decided to do a response video because this was a really fun subject. I distinctly remember getting into metal in my teenage years and just being rabid about it. Like, I instantly found something I loved. So it's a lot of fun to actually go back and find all these albums that I know 100% got me into metal in general. So let's start it off. Sepultura Arise. This was the first Sepultura album I ever bought. A buddy of mine showed me these guys. We were driving around in a car, smoking weed. But he put this on and was like, yeah, dude, check this out. And I was instantly just hooked. Like, I loved how heavy it was. I had been exposed to thrash just like a little bit at this point. But this just sounded different. It was heavier, it was more aggressive. This is still hands down my favorite Sepultura album. If you saw our Sepultura discography ranking, yeah, there was no doubt in my mind this was going to be my number one. It's been a huge part of my life. And I have to say this influenced so much stuff that I listened to. Like, this kind of got me a little bit into death metal, but mostly this just cemented that I was going to be a huge thrash fan. If you've never heard this, man, are you missing out. Megadeth. So far, so good, so what? This isn't even my favorite Megadeth album, but this is what got me into them. I just remember my buddy putting this on. Again, I think we were probably high, but as soon as he put on Set the World Afire, as soon as that bomb dropped and that intro riff comes in, I was just in love with the sound. Now, yeah, the mix isn't the best in here. This is the reissued one from, I believe, 2005. But I absolutely just got into the overall sound. I really like Dave Mustaine's just fuck you sneer that was all throughout the music, and I went out and bought everything I could Megadeth right after this. This was definitely a big one for me getting into thrash. And there's going to be a lot of thrash on here, but there's telling me some other stuff as well. But yeah, thrash was kind of the big gateway for me in terms of metal. So again, with thrash, Anthrax, Persistence of Time. First time I ever listened to Anthrax, and I absolutely love this album. I love Blood, Keep It in the Family on there. Intro to Reality, I just love the melody on there. This was them being slightly more serious. I didn't get all their other albums until later. I think the next album I got was Fistful of Metal, which I was completely shocked at how raw it was compared to how well produced this was. I still jam this one quite a bit. I admit I jam Among the Living quite a bit more just because that probably is my favorite Anthrax album. I'm not going to commit to that just in case we do a ranking, but there's a good chance it is. But yeah, this got me into more melodic thrash and maybe speed metal too, just because Joey Belladonna was a singer. And I was kind of shocked listening to it at first, because all the thrash I heard before when I had kind of this raspy bark, and this guy was actually singing. But yeah, I absolutely love this album still, and I recommend checking it out if you haven't ever heard it. Pantera, Far Beyond Driven. Same buddy. There was one buddy in high school that definitely got me into a lot of metal. Played this for me, and right from the rip, Strength Beyond Strength, I was like, dude, this is just how pissed off I feel all the time being a shitty teenager. And I was a shitty teenager. Most teenagers are shitty, but I was an exceptionally shitty teenager. This pretty much just echoed with all the fucking rage. The subject matter I thought was a little bit more about just like sort of the hostility that was inside of me, and yeah, it just kind of resonated with me. Pantera seems to get a lot of shit these days, but I grew up with them. They've always been a part of my musical background, and yeah, I still enjoy this album. This is still one I get into all the time just because I still remember exactly how I felt when I first heard these songs. Still, awesome album. Definitely check it out. Morbid Angel, Covenant. This one was one of those early ones for death metal. Now, there's another one on here that was a little bit earlier of an exposure to death metal on here, but I'll get to that one later. But this one was honestly the first time I listened to music and I thought it was legit evil. As soon as I heard God of Emptiness, the whole let the children come to me and all that, like the chanting, it wasn't even the growls, it was the chanting that's like, dude, this feels evil. And then, my buddy showed me the album cover on his cassette, and I was like, dude, wow, this feels just, I don't know, evil. And, me being a dumb teenager, I was super impressionable. But I absolutely love this album now. This is one of my favorite Morbid Angel albums. This was also the major label debut for them, which I thought was weird. Like, this band was on a large label versus, underground stuff, which that was far more common. But yeah, this made me a Morbid Angel fan. I'm still a giant Morbid Angel fan. And yeah, this was an interesting one in terms of my listening. Check it out if you've never heard it. Check all these out if you've never heard them. These are pretty much classics in my mind. But that's just me. Ministry. Psalm 69, The Way to Succeed and the Way to Suck Eggs. I remember seeing the video for Jesus Built My Hot Rod on MTV. It was probably like on 120 minutes. Might have been on Headbangers Ball. I don't remember. But I was like, dude, what is this? I really wasn't aware of what industrial metal was or industrial music in general. Like, this was honestly one of my first exposures to it. And it was just nuts. I went out and bought the album, and I love, like, every single track on here. Scarecrow is immensely creepy. And there's a cool, creepy vibe to this. And then you have borderline kind of grindcore with TV2. It's a really wild album. I still come back to this one a lot. But, Jesus Built My Hot Rod is up there with, like, my favorite songs. And the whole story behind it with Gabby Hayes coming in drunk out of his mind, and they just recorded it right there. And they even had to put him, like, back on the stool that he was singing on because he was just mumbling gibberish, and they're like, no, we're going to use it. This is the take. Awesome album. If you've never actually jammed industrial metal from the 90s, there's a lot of good stuff out there, but this was probably one of the crowning glories of the entire scene. Check it out. Prong Cleansing. This one is one of those bands that I bought just because the album cover looked metal. Like, you had an eyeball and a fork and a big logo that says Prong, and I was like, there's no way this isn't metal. And this became one of my favorite albums of the 90s. I picked this up used, and I just repeatedly jammed it. Snap Your Finger, Snap Your Neck, of course, the big hit on there. And I actually had not heard that on the radio or anything. This is back when metal got played on the radio. So that had, like, no bearing on it. I really had no exposure to this band before this album. And just jamming it over and over again. Cut Rate has just some insane, thrashy, just nuttery. I love that song. And of course, Whose Fist Is This Anyway, which is just surprisingly catchy. And this is just so damn riffy. I still love this album. I still come back to it frequently, and I still buy new Prong albums just because Tommy Victor is a fucking riff guy. And I love riffs. But yeah, this was a big one for me. It's still getting played a lot around here too. White Zombie, La Sexorcisto, Devil Music Volume 1. I remember picking this up in a head shop / record store, probably 94. And I just saw the cover, and I remember hearing about the band White Zombie. And I picked this up, and when I saw the demon and the big-titted biker chicks or whatever on the back, I was like, dude, what is this going to be all about? And it's just a wild listen. This is one, like, my favorite groove metal / industrial metal albums out there. All the weird samples in there, from like Faster Pussycat to, I believe it's Yurasukodoji or Yurasukojido. It's pretty much anime porn with giant multi-dicked demons destroying fucking cities and shit. It's weird. It's really weird. But it's Japan, so it's weird. But I absolutely love this. Black Sunshine, Soul Crusher is still up there with, like, some of my favorite songs from my childhood. I still listen to this one quite frequently. In fact, this might still be the same copy I bought. I might have just taken really good care of it. Surprise, surprise. Maybe I wasn't that shitty of a teenager. I was. This is absolutely an amazing album. Astro Creep was good. I thought about putting it on here because I got really big into that one too. But this one just felt, I don't know, more fun. Like, this was just a flat-out fun album to listen to. It was a really fucked up one to fall asleep to, because I used to sleep with headphones on, and I usually wake up around the little interlude One Big Crunch, where it starts saying only parts of the corpse have been removed, and I'm like, nope, can't fall asleep with that in my head. Definitely check this out if you've never heard it. It's so much fucking fun. Neurosis, Through Silver in Blood. This technically was the first band I saw at Ozfest in 97 ever, and the sound never left me. I couldn't believe how heavy and loud and massive this sound was. I didn't even know about the term post-metal or anything like that. I just knew that this was something different, and it really just blew me away right away. Now, at that Ozfest, Ozzy didn't play, was in Columbus, and there was a big fucking riot. Car was flipped. There was, I think it was also set on fire too. They tore down a giant fence and shit. Now, a week later, my buddy and I got to go back because they honored ticket stubs, and Ozzy was just going to play a solo set, but they had Neurosis open for him. So Neurosis was on the small stage at Ozfest when we saw him. They got to return except on the large pavilion stage using their PA, and my God, it was loud. So this was my introduction to Neurosis, and I've been a giant fan ever since. And at that time I had heard nothing like them. Then I started getting into tons of different post-metal bands just because it's just such an immersive kind of trancey sound. Definitely showed me there was a lot of different stuff as far as metal going on out there than, you know, just thrash and death metal. Definitely an eye-opener for sure. Cannibal Corpse, Eaten Back to Life. Now this isn't my original copy, this was the remastered, but I remember, of course, seeing them in Ace Ventura, and at that point in my life, I had never heard anything like Cannibal Corpse. It was so aggressive, it was beyond thrash metal for me. And I just remember going to a record store, you know, after seeing that movie, it was a little bit of time later, and walking down an aisle and seeing their original logo, not this one, and seeing this album, say, hey, that's that Ace Ventura band. So I picked this one up. You know, it didn't have Hammer Smash Face on it. Didn't learn until, you know, I found that album. But when I jammed this, I was like, dude, this will do. It was just super aggressive, all the gore lyrics. Scattered Remains, Splattered Brains is still one of my favorites on here. Born in a Casket, of course. Skull Full of Maggots, that's the mainstay. But yeah, this definitely was the thing that was kind of the catalyst for death metal. You know, even before Morbid Angel. Like, this was a little bit easier to get into than that because, you know, again, it didn't feel evil. It just felt kind of gross and grimy. By this point, I was already big into horror movies. You know, I was pretty much renting out the entire horror movie section at our local video store. And that was during that 90s video boom. And pretty much all the Full Moon stuff and, you know, whatever else had a gross cover on it. So this kind of just made sense. And yeah, been a Cannibal Corpse fan ever since. Speaking of evil, Deicide Legion. This was my first exposure to Deicide. I remember a buddy of mine telling me about this band. And I was kind of skeptical at first because looking at the back cover, I was like, dude, these guys all look like they want to kick my fucking ass. And yeah, I mean, I was just looking at the song titles, and there was a lot about Satan and everything. I didn't grow up in the church. My mom pretty much let me do whatever I want, but, you know, I was a little into the supernatural. Like, I don't know, it could be real. It's not. That's just my belief, though. But I put this on, and I had never heard anything that fast at that point. Steve Ashim is such an incredible drummer. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, because I fucking love that dude. And I just loved how in your face it was. Glenn Benton's vocal delivery is great on here. Dead But Dreaming is up there with my favorite Deicide songs. This is such an awesome album, and this again really cemented the fact that death metal was going to be a thing for me. Speaking of death metal, Obituary. This is the Don't Care single. I didn't get World Demise until a little bit later. That was the album that was coming out when I was getting into death metal. And I just remember picking this up for like $3 or something like that at Coconut Music, which I think was a subsidiary of Sam Goody, which I'm not even sure that exists anymore. But I picked it up just because of the cover and the logo. Actually, I drew this logo on a pair of jeans I had, and I remember some snooty chick in high school was like, "You were in your jeans." Like, fuck you. Leave me alone. Why are you talking to me? But yeah, I really don't listen to the single much except for one song. The bonus track on here, Killing Victims Found, is easily one of my favorite Obituary songs. And that breakdown on there is just disgusting. If you've never jammed that song, I'm probably going to put it in the description. I strongly recommend this one. But yeah, it has, of course, Don't Care on it, which ended up being kind of a big single. They still play it live all the time. And Solid State, which is one of my favorite tracks on World Demise. But this was different. I noticed it was a bit groovier, was a little bit closer to thrash metal, and I absolutely love John Tardy's vocals. I'm still a huge fan. I love how over the top he sounds. It's awesome. And I loved how just sludgy this sounded. Like, I really got into the fact that it was a bit slower. It wasn't all blast beats like Cannibal Corpse and Deicide, and they were a little bit faster than these guys. Obituary is still consistently one of my favorite bands. I mean, yeah, I fucking love Obituary. This was what did it. Testament, Return to the Apocalyptic City EP. Talk about buying an album just because the album cover was cool. This I bought on a whim. I had no idea who Testament was, or that this was even a live EP. I just saw the album cover. It was in a used bin, and I bought it. That was pretty much it. And then when I played it, I was instantly in love. The live version of Over the Wall in here is absolutely killer, but the one that really got me was the live version of Disciples of the Watch. That was my first exposure to that song. I never heard it on the New Order. I didn't pick up the New Order until after this because I went out and fucking bought all sorts of Testament shit. But when I heard Chuck Billy get down and do those super low vocals, I was like, dude, wow. I adore this band to this day. I mean, we just reviewed them on here. And honestly, if we were ranking stuff, this one would be up there a little bit just because of the nostalgia, because I still remember the feeling that I had first listening to this. It's that good of a listen. Check it out. Suffocation, Pierced from Within. This was my first exposure to Suffocation, and probably my first exposure to brutal death metal. I remember I was out in Colorado. I got sent to an archaeology camp. We were like digging for Pueblo Indian stuff on a canyon rim, which wasn't great for me because I'm scared of heights and scared of rattlesnakes, and there were both. But I remember this one kid from California had his little boombox out there, and I was playing like Sepultura and probably some Megadeth, and he was like, do you ever heard of Suffocation? And I was like, no. And he popped this in, and when I heard Thrones of Blood, which he skipped to, I was like, dude, this track right here, that pretty much did it. I absolutely love this album. This is one of my favorite Suffocation albums. I mean, going through all the albums, I really can't say if it's the number one, but man, it's close. This was definitely something that got me into more brutal music. Like, Cannibal Corpse was damn heavy, so was Deicide, but this was different. The breakdowns were nastier. There was just something so visceral about this sound that I got hooked right away. If you've never jammed this album, man, you have missed out on a death metal gem. Strife, In This Defiance. This was one of my early exposures to hardcore. And this was really metally hardcore. Like, it was very chuggy, it was kind of thrashy. And this is the first time I heard of Victory Records, and I started buying stuff from there because I really got into hardcore after this. Like, picked up Hatebreed not too long after that. I think, like, Shutdown, Bloodlet, or Blood for Blood. I don't know, it might have been both. Either way, this was pretty much a big one for getting me into hardcore and that sort of side of the heavy spectrum. Later on, I'd get into Sick of It All and just go nuts with that. Sick of It All is, like, still consistently one of my favorite hardcore bands. I thought about putting them on here, but this was where the hardcore love really started, so this seems more appropriate. Either way, if you've never checked this out, this is just a straight up awesome hardcore album. These guys are still around too. They put out an album a few years ago that I thought was really solid. Just straight up hardcore. If you like that, you'll like this. KMFDM Angst. You remember Beavis and Butthead? I remember Beavis and Butthead because they played the video to the thrashiest song on here, A Drug Against War, and I was pretty much enamored right away. I loved how staticky the vocals were. The drum machine sounded really cool. It kind of sounded like machine gun fire with the guitars going. And this is probably the most metal album I think they ever made, but it's still 100% industrial. Like, it has all the, danceable rhythms and the drum loops and keyboards, but at the same time, it's still very much a metal album. I mean, if you just listen to songs like A Hole in the Wall, it's very much just driven by chuggy metal riffs, and I absolutely loved it. I love the guitar tone in here, too. Like, this has just a really nice thrash tone. This was another one that got me big into industrial, and I think after this I started getting into, like, Nine Inch Nails and Filter, well, back when they were more industrial, like Short Bus. But I absolutely love this album still. This is still probably my favorite KMFDM album. It may not be the most extreme thing on here, but it's a fun listen. Brutal Truth, Sounds of the Animal Kingdom. Now, this isn't my original version. This is actually the one that comes with Kill Trend Suicide, too. Again, when I was a kid, I would pick up stuff based on album covers. And this album cover, even though it's covered up by a sticker, most people know it, and I'll have the art up, is just odd. Actually, this cover grossed out my mom for some odd reason. Like, she looked at all the Cannibal Corpse covers and she's like, oh, that's gross, but this one just disturbed her. I had never listened to grindcore up until this point, really, and this was just nuts. Like, this was just pure chaos. But I got into it, though. Like, it was strange. It was different. I had never heard anything like this. And this was definitely the big gateway into grindcore. Like, I discovered Napalm Death, which was just kind of a name I heard before. And then, like, early Carcass. And honestly, this was, like, a big thing for me getting into stuff on Relapse Records. Like, this and definitely Neurosis. But this one got me into, like, more of their more extreme bands. Like, you know, years later, I would discover Dying Fetus and, like, holy shit, this is nuts. But, yeah, this is up there with, like, my favorite grindcore albums. I like some of their earlier stuff a little bit better, but I still have a soft spot for this one because it was, you know, a big thing I listened to when I was a teen. Broken Hope, Loathing. I remember picking up, like, issues of Metal Edge and, like, Hip Raider. And I remember they covered a lot of metal bands, but then I discovered Metal Maniacs magazine, and they covered more extreme bands. And I would see ads for this album all the time. And I eventually ended up finding it in, like, a used bin in a CD store, and I jammed this, and I absolutely love this one. This was pretty much a combination of the stuff I liked about Obituary, but also with that kind of brutal death edge that I liked about Suffocation. It was a perfect mix because this is definitely one of their more groove-oriented albums, but it does not sacrifice on riffs or brutality. This is one of my favorite Broken Hope albums. The whole magazine thing became kind of big with, like, this purchase and some other ones because I would start picking those up more often. It wasn't just me being an asshole kid just sitting by the magazine rack reading all the magazines and then putting them back. I actually went out and bought them because I wanted to know what else new was coming out, and, you know, thus started building my obsession with metal. Awesome release. I would say fiercely underrated too. Broken Hope's an amazing band, and you should definitely check them out. Slayer, Rain and Blood. It was bound to be on here. I remember that same buddy that I got stoned with played this one for me, and again, right from the rip, Angel of Death. How does your heart not want to fly out of your chest when you hear that? It is one of the most intense songs ever. There isn't a weak moment on this album. This is the reissue from, I forget what year they reissued it, but it's not even a half an hour long. I think it's like 29 minutes, 34 seconds, and it is one of the most intense thrash albums there is. It's just insane. I went out and bought a Slayer shirt after that, and for some odd reason they let me wear that in high school despite having a giant pentagram on it. Luckily they were kind of cool about that. But this is still my favorite Slayer album. It was my number one in our Slayer ranking, to probably no one's surprise for anyone that knows me. I still love this album. I still jam it regularly, and this is one of the finest moments in thrash in my opinion. Check it out. If you haven't heard it, then I don't know how you haven't. It's one of those albums. And finally, Iron Maiden, Killers. One of my favorite Iron Maiden albums. This was the first one I ever bought. I remember as a kid, and, like, much younger, like as an actual kid, not a teenager, like going to the fair and seeing people rocking this, you know, on t-shirts, or they had flags that you could win at the fair games with Iron Maiden on it. It was mostly Number of the Beast, but I distinctly remember the logo and this lovely gentleman here. So while I was getting into thrash, I saw this on a rack, and it was a different version. It was a different reissue. But I picked it up, and I just remember falling in love with this beautiful guitar work across the board. And it was kind of odd. Growing up in the 90s, the first Maiden album I ever pick up doesn't even have Bruce Dickinson on it. And I really like Paul Di'Anno. I think he's got a great fucking voice. And he absolutely kills it on here. And Steve Harris's bass work is just absolutely incredible. Murders in the Rue Morgue, Another Life, Purgatory, one of my favorite jams on here. I absolutely love the chorus on there. But this entire album is just killer. So, yeah, this was my introduction to, like, new wave of British heavy metal. Like, I remember jamming, like, Judas Priest as a kid, but I never owned any at that point. It was just this cool band that was on MTV. This was something I owned that was of that style, and became a giant fan. Like, this absolutely cemented it. So yeah, that pretty much rounds out 20 albums that I got into as a teenager. And going back, man, it's just been fun just even talking about these. Like, I'm probably going to end up listening to these later today, just because they had such an impact on me. And Most of these albums that I brought up have a pretty solid status as is. Some of them are a little bit more obscure. These albums made me the metal nut that I am now, that hangs out in record stores and just like, show me what's new, what you got in the fucking used bin. Anyone trading in their metal collections, I'll fucking buy it. Like, I'm that fucking guy. But yeah, this is what did it. This is easily what did it. So, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do shit like this all the time. Also, make sure to check out Marty Worm's channel. There'll be a link to his original video in the description. And, of course, links to all the music if you've never heard it. I mean, a lot of these have been around for a while, but if you've never heard it, I strongly recommend jamming them because they're awesome. You guys take care, stay home, stay safe.